Welcome, my friends. Sit and listen to a story of a young schoolmaster in a village and the horror he faced as he tried to woo a local rancher's daughter. Contrary to popular belief, Ichabod Crane is a young itinerant schoolmaster with a passion for the supernatural. Lodging with a local rancher and visiting various local homes, he spends his time singing and eating and entertaining the young women of the area. Nearby, there is a local glen called Sleepy Hollow, with a legend about a headless horseman who is supposed to haunt it. A legend that will come all too true for Ichabod. All in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, link to part 1 above. To continue to make content, we need to grow. So please like, subscribe, but just as importantly, comment and share. The algorithm must be fed, or else it will consume the channel. Comments are one of its favourite meals, and only you can feed it. In part 2, we hear of the fanciful life of Ichabod and meet his rival for Katrina's affections. Come, sit, watch and listen, as it is time to enter the Cave of Chronicles. From his half-itinerant life, also he was a kind of travelling gazette, carrying the whole budget of local gossip from house to house, so that his appearance was always greeted with satisfaction. He was, moreover, esteemed by the woman as a man of great erudition, for he had read several books quite through and was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, in which, by the way, he most firmly and potently believed. He was, in fact, an odd mixture of small shrewdness and simple credulity. His appetite for the marvellous and his powers of digesting it were equally extraordinary, and both had been increased by his residence in this spellbound region. No tale was too gross or monstrous for his capricious swallow. It was often his delight, after his school was dismissed in the afternoon, to stretch himself on the rich bed of clover bordering the little brook that whimpered by his schoolhouse, and there con over old Mather's direful tales, until the gathering dusk of evening made the printed page a mere mist before his eyes. Then, as he wended his way by swamp and stream and awful woodland to the farmhouse where he happened to be quartered, every sound of nature at that witching hour fluttered his excited imagination. The moan of the whippoorwill from the hillside, the boding cry of the tree toad, that harbinger of storm, the dreary hooting of the screech owl, or the sudden rustling in the thicket of birds frightened from their roost. The fireflies too, which sparkled most vividly in the darkest places, now and then startled him, as one of uncommon brightness would stream across his path, as if, by chance, a huge blockhead of a beetle came winging his blundering flight against him. The poor varlet was ready to give up the ghost with the idea that he was struck by a witch's token. His only resource on such occasions, either to drown thought or drive away evil spirits, was to sing psalm tunes, and the good people of Sleepy Hollow, as they sat in their doors of an evening, were often filled with awe at hearing his nasal melody. In linked sweetness, long drawn out, floating in the distant hill or along the dusky road. Another of his sources of fearful pleasure was to pass long winter evenings with the old Dutch wives as they sat spinning by the fire, with a row of apples roasting and spluttering along the hearth, and listen to their marvellous tales of ghosts and goblins and haunted fields and haunted brooks and haunted bridges and haunted houses, and particularly of the headless horseman, or galloping Hessian of the Hollow, as they sometimes called him. He would delight them equally with his anecdotes of witchcraft and of the direful omens and portentous sights and sounds in the air which prevailed in the earlier times of Connecticut, and would frighten them woefully with speculations on comets and shooting stars, and with the alarming fact that the world did absolutely turn round, and that they were half the time topsy-turvy. But if there was a pleasure in all this, while snugly cuddling in the chimney corner of a chamber that was all of a ruddy glow from the crackling wood fire, and where, of course, no spectre dared to show its face, it was dearly purchased by the terrors of his subsequent walk homewards. What fearful shapes and shadows beset his path amidst the dim and ghastly glare of a snowy night. With what wistful look did he eye every trembling ray of light streaming across the waste fields from some distant window. How often was he appalled by some shrub covered with snow, which, like a sheeted spectre, beset his very path. How often did he shrink with curdling awe at the sound of his own steps on the frosty crust beneath his feet, and dread to look over his shoulder lest he should behold some uncouth being trampling close behind him. And how often was he thrown into complete dismay by some rushing blast howling among the trees, in the idea that it was the galloping Hessian on one of his nightly scourings. All of these, however, were mere terrors of the night, phantoms of the mind that walk in darkness. And though he had seen many spectres in his time, and had been more than once beset by Satan in divers shapes in his lonely perambulations, yet daylight put an end to all these evils, and he would have passed a pleasant life of it, in despite of the devil and all his works, if his path had not been crossed by a being that causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together. And that was a woman. Among the musical disciples who assembled one evening in each week to receive his instruction in psalmody was Katrina van Tassel, the daughter and only child of a substantial Dutch farmer. She was a blooming lass of fresh 18, plump as a partridge, ripe and melting and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's peaches, and universally famed not only for her beauty, but for her vast expectations. She was, withal, a little of a coquette, as might be perceived even in her dress, which was a mixture of ancient and modern fashions, as most suited to set off her charms. She wore ornaments of pure yellow gold, which her great-great-grandmother had brought over from Sardam, the tempting stomacher of the olden time, and withal a provoking short petticoat to display the prettiest foot and ankle in the country round. Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart towards the sex, and it was not to be wondered at that so tempting a morsel soon found favour in his eyes, more especially after he had visited her in her paternal mansion. Old Baltus Van Tassel was a perfect picture of a thriving, contented, liberal-hearted farmer. He seldom, it is true, sent either his eyes or his thoughts beyond the boundaries of his own farm. But within those, everything was snug, happy, and well-conditioned. He was satisfied with his wealth, but not proud of it, and piqued himself upon the hearty abundance rather than the style in which he lived. His stronghold was situated on the banks of the Hudson, in one of those green, sheltered, fertile nooks in which the Dutch farmers are so fond of nesting. A great elm tree spread its broad branches over it, at the foot of which bubbled up a spring of the softest and sweetest water in a little well formed of a barrel, and then stole sparkling away through the grass to a neighbouring brook that babbled along among alders and dwarf willows. Hard by the farmhouse was a vast barn that might have served for a church, every window and crevice of which seemed bursting forth with the treasures of the farm. The flail was busily resounding within it from morning to night. Swallows and martins skimmed twittering among the eaves, and rows of pigeons, some with one eye turned up as if watching the weather, some with their heads under their wing or buried in their bosoms, and others swelling and cooing and bowing about their dames, were enjoying the sunshine on the roof. Sleek, unwieldy porkers were grunting in their repose and abundance of their pens, from whence sailed forth now and then troops of suckling pigs as if to snuff the air. A stately squadron of snow geese were riding in an adjoining pool, conveying whole fleets of ducks. Regiments of turkeys were gobbling through the farmyard, and guinea fowls fretting about it like ill-tempered housewives with their peevish, discontented cry. Before the barn door strutted the gallant cock, that pattern of a husband, a warrior, and a fine gentleman, clapping his burnished wings and crowing in the pride and gladness of his heart, sometimes tearing up the earth with his feet, and then generously calling his ever-hungry family of wives and children to enjoy the rich morsel which he had discovered. The pedagogue's mouth watered as he looked upon this sumptuous promise of luxurious winter fare. In his devouring mind's eye, he pictured to himself every roasting pig running about with a pudding in his belly and an apple in his mouth. The pigeons were snugly put to bed in a comfortable pie and tucked in with a coverlet of crust. The geese were swimming in their own gravy, and the ducks pairing cosily in the dishes like snug married couples with a decent competency of onion sauce. In the porkers he saw carved out the future sleek side of bacon and a juicy relishing ham. Not a turkey, but he beheld daintily trussed up with its gizzard under its wing, and peradventure a necklace of savoury sausages. And even bright Chanticleer himself lay sprawling on his back in a side dish, with uplifted claws as if craving that quarter which his chivalrous spirit disdained to ask while living, as the enraptured Ichabod fancied all this, and as he rolled his great green eyes over the fat meadowlands, the rich fields of wheat, of rye, of buckwheat and Indian corn, and the orchards burdened with ruddy fruit which surrounded the warm tenement of Van Tassel. His heart yearned after the damsel who was to inherit these domains, and his imagination expanded with the idea of how they might be readily turned into cash, and the money invested in immense tracts of wild lands and shingle palaces in the wilderness. Nay, his busy fancy already realised his hopes and presented to him the blooming Katrina with whole family of children mounted on the top of a wagon loaded with household trumpery, with pots and kettles dangling beneath, and he beheld himself bestriding a pacing mare with a colt at her heels, setting out for Kentucky, Tennessee, or the Lord knows where. When he entered the house, the conquest of his heart was complete. It was one of those spacious farmhouses with high-ridged but lowly sloping roofs, built in the style handed down from the first Dutch settlers, with low projecting eaves forming a piazza along the front, capable of being closed up in bad weather. Under this were hung flails, harnesses, various utensils of husbandry, and nets for fishing in the neighbouring river. Benches were built along the sides for summer use, and a great spinning wheel at one end and a churn at the other showed the various uses to which this important porch might be devoted. From this piazza, the wandering Ichabod entered the hall, which formed the centre of the mansion and the place of usual residence. Here, rows of resplendent pewter, ranged on a long dresser, dazzled his eyes. In one corner stood a huge bag of wool, ready to be spun. In another, a quantity of linsey woolsey, just from the loom, ears of Indian corn, and strings of dried apples and peaches hung in gay festoons along the walls, mingled with the gourd of red peppers, and a door left ajar gave him a peep into the best parlour, where the claw-footed chairs and dark mahogany tables shone like mirrors, and irons, with their accompanying shovel and tongs, glistened from their covert of asparagus tops. Mock oranges and conch shells decorated the mantelpiece. Strings of various coloured birds' eggs were suspended above it. A great ostrich egg was hung from the centre of the room, and a corner cupboard, knowingly left open, displayed immense treasures of old silver and well-mended china. From the moment Ichabod laid his eyes upon these regions of delight, the peace of his mind was at an end, and his only study was how to gain the affections of the peerless daughter of Van Tassel. In this enterprise, however, he had more real difficulties than generally fell to the lot of a knight-errant of yore, who seldom had anything but giants, enchanters, fiery dragons, and such easily conquered adversaries to contend with, and had to make his way merely through the gate of iron and brass, and walls of adamant to the castle keep, where the lady of his heart was confined, all which he achieved as easily as a man would carve his way into the centre of a Christmas pie. And then the lady gave him her hand as a matter of course. Ichabod on the contrary, had to win his way to the heart of a country coquette, beset with a labyrinth of whims and caprices, which were forever presenting new difficulties and impediments. And he had to encounter a host of fearful adversaries of real flesh and blood, the numerous rustic admirers who beset every portal in her heart, keeping a watchful and angry eye upon each other, but ready to fly out in the common cause against any new competitor. Among these, the most formidable was a burly, roaring, roistering blade by the name of Abraham, or, according to the Dutch abbreviation, Brom van Brunt, the hero of the country round, which rang with his feats of strength and hardihood. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with short curly black hair and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance. From his Herculean frame and great powers of limb, he had received the nickname of Brom Bones, by which he was universally known. He was famed for great knowledge and skill in horsemanship, being as dexterous on horseback as a Tartar. He was foremost at all races and cockfights, with the ascendancy which body strength always acquires in rustic life, was the umpire in all disputes, setting his hat on one side and giving his decisions with an air and tone that admitted no gainsay or appeal. He was always ready for either a fight or a frolic, but had more mischief than ill will in his composition. And with his overbearing roughness, there was a strong dash of waggish good humour at the bottom. He had 3 or 4 boon companions who regarded him as their model, and at the head of whom he scoured the country, attending every scene of feud or merriment for miles around. In cold weather, he was distinguished by a fur cap surmounted with a flaunting fox's tail. And when the folks at a country gathering described this well-known crest at a distance, whisking about amongst a squad of hard riders, they always stood by for a squall. Sometimes his crew would be heard dashing along past the farmhouses at midnight, with a whoop and a halloo like a troop of Don Cossacks. The old dames, startled out of their sleep, would listen for a moment till the hurry-scurry had clattered by, and then exclaim, "Aye, there goes Brom Bones and his gang." The neighbours looked up upon him with a mixture of awe, admiration and goodwill, and when any madcap prank or rustic brawl occurred in the vicinity, always shook their heads and warranted Brom Bones was at the bottom of it. This ranty-pole hero had for some time singled out the blooming Katrina for the object of his uncouth gallantries, and though his amorous toyings were something like the gentle caresses and endearments of a bear, yet it was whispered that she did not altogether discourage his hopes. Certain it is, his advances were signals for rival candidates to retire, who felt no inclination to cross a lion in his amours, insomuch that when his horse was seen tied to Van Tassels' paling on a Sunday night, a sure sign that its master was courting, or as it is termed, sparking within, all other suitors passed away in despair and carried the war into other quarters. So ends part 2 of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. In part 3, Ichabod woos Katrina, and both rivals head to a society event at her father's ranch. We currently release at least 3 episodes a week, more on weeks that we release a complete version or have a live stream. So check the channel page for more stories. Link above. If you have enjoyed the tale, it helps us if you let others know, so please click the like button. Subscribing will let you travel with us on future adventures, with the bell notifying you as we set off. If you want to join our band of intrepid explorers of the unknown, come visit us on Patreon, where we have a Discord server where you can share in discussions with both myself and the other members, and even help guide the live storytelling. There will be behind the scenes content, early access content, and options to guide which stories are chosen as the membership grows. There are even tiers to get your own stories produced, and a free tier if you just want notifications and updates. YouTube memberships will follow when I have enough hours. If you subscribe and watch, it will help. Please only join if you can afford to. The comments are like a book club where you can have a discussion on the story and what you thought about it. There, you can let me know if there are any specific stories you would like to see produced in this format. I'm even open to suggestions on how I can improve the content. I try and reply to every comment, so your input will not be ignored. See the description for details of the Patreon, our other social media pages, and for a link to Canje Studios to find out about Arkham Horror and many other board games. Click on the end screen to subscribe, go to the next story in the series, or to hear about the horror at Red Hook. Until next time, farewell, and beware, the sound of horses in the night may not be altogether friendly.